Buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chicklet, a podcast where I share my honest reviews of books that I think first gens, women, and people who want to grow would enjoy. Please subscribe and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and YouTube at Chicklet Podcast, and enjoy today's episode on the book, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. There are 304 pages in the book. The genres are fantasy, contemporary, magical realism, science fiction, and adult. Matt Haig is the author of the instant New York Times bestseller, The Comfort Book, 2 memoirs, Notes on a Nervous Planet, and the internationally best-selling Reasons to Stay Alive, along with 6 novels, including How to Stop Time and several award-winning children's books. The Midnight Library, a #1 New York Times bestseller, is his latest novel and has sold more than 6 million copies worldwide. His work has been translated into more than 40 languages, so he's super accomplished. I was reading a little bit about him earlier, and I think that he suffered like an illness or something, and that's why a lot of his books have this focus on like living your life to the fullest. It's very clear that he experienced a life-threatening illness and that he could have died because this whole thing is very philosophical and gets you thinking about your own life. So for the Cheeseman portion, I want to talk about quantum physics, which sounds wild, but that's the theory that there are an infinite number of alternate realities currently going on at the same time that our reality is going on. So many different, like it's an infinite, I can't even list the amount of realities, like paths that my life could have gone. And that's what this book explores. Corey S. Powell wrote an article for NBC describing the theory and says, in 1957, a Princeton student named Hugh Everett III proposed that all possible outcomes really do occur, but that only a single version plays out in the world we inhabit. All the other possibilities split off from us, each giving rise to its own separate world. Nothing ever goes to waste in this view, since everything that can happen does happen in some world. It's definitely like a trippy book, but the entire thing is not sci-fi. The author shares a lot about the main character, Nora. So you might think, oh, I'm not really science-y. It doesn't really go into that. You'll see. So the main character, Nora, she was depressed. And one day she was fired from her 3 jobs that she had. She worked at a music store, and her boss told her that she was like drawing away customers with her sour attitude. She also was teaching piano lessons to a young boy. She just got fired, so she was thrown off, and it made her miss that piano lesson. And so she gets fired from that piano lesson job, and she thinks it's because she missed that appointment. She also delivers her older neighbor's medicine. She goes to the pharmacy, picks it up, and brings it to him like once a week or something. And she doesn't think that this is a big thing. I personally would not think that that's a big thing either. It's obviously very nice. She doesn't need to do it. I don't even think they're paying her. It's just something that she does out of the kindness of her heart. And she gets fired from that job as well. So she gets fired from all 3 of her tasks, all of the 3 things that get her out of bed and the things that she does in her life. You know, she doesn't have any friends. She's not seeing anyone. She doesn't have any children. Now that she's lost those 3 things, she's kind of like lost a little bit of hope. She also has a lot of regrets as well. When she was a young kid, she was a really good swimmer, and her dad wanted her to go to the Olympics for being such a good swimmer. But she stopped doing that because I think it just overwhelmed her, and like the pressure of it was too much for her. Another regret she has is she has a brother who doesn't speak to her. And they were in a band together, and they had an opportunity to sign with a record label. I think that's what they're called, record labels. And she said no because she had anxiety going on stage and like getting famous and stuff. And she was like, no, I can't do it. So she said no to that, which honestly, like Olympics, like music, like you can't be like musically inclined and be a good swimmer. I mean, statistically, like I feel like that's really hard, but for the sake of the book, it's fiction, whatever. Another thing that she regrets is she has a really good friend who moved to Australia, and she said that she would move with her. And then she like, stopped and said, no, I'm not going to move with her. So she feels like her friend is mad at her, and they've drifted apart because the friend went to Australia and she stayed living, I think, in England. Another regret she has is she was dating someone, and while she was dating this man, this other man, a surgeon, asked her out to coffee, but because she was dating the first one, she said no. The guy that she stayed with, she broke up with and called off their engagement 2 days before the wedding. So basically she left him at the altar. Not really, not exactly, but I mean, pretty close. So she has this laundry list of regrets. She got fired from her 3 jobs, and she comes home and it's late at night. She's feeling really down, obviously. She gets a knock on her door, and it's the surgeon, the guy that she rejected a few years ago. And he's like, I think that's your dead cat in the road. So her cat got hit by a car and died. So she decides to unalive herself. It's not told in graphic detail. And so what happens is that she kind of goes into, I don't know what the book calls it, but to me it seems like a purgatory. It's like a step before you actually die. So in the book it says, between life and death, there is a library. And within that library, the shelves go on forever. Every book provides a chance to try another life you could have lived, to see how things would be if you had made other choices. Would you have done anything different if you had the chance to undo your regrets? This kind of reminds me of the book Under the Whispering Door. I don't know if you've read it. It's by the same author who wrote The House on the Cerulean Sea. Under the Whispering Door is about the cafe. Well, first of all, it's LGBTQ plus love. So that already is a green flag. That's why I wanted to read it. But in the book, this one character works at a cafe or owns a cafe. And when people pass away, they go to the cafe. Their ghost goes to the cafe to process their death. And then once they're able to go on to heaven or die, then they walk through a door. And so someone dies, they go to the cafe and they're processing the death. And it's like that same purgatory, like I'm alive, interacting with people, but like actually I'm dead. And so similar to this book where it's like she's trying to unalive herself in her root life, but in this library, in this purgatory that she's in, she's able to explore other options. So it's a nice thought. I liked it. You kind of lose me a little bit because as she's exploring these alternate universes, like I thought that everything was happening at the same time. So when she goes to another universe and she's doing X, Y, and Z, like what is she doing in her root life? Is she dead for like weeks at a time when she's out exploring the other universe? Like kind of loses me that way, but I'm going to leave that behind me because it's a fiction book. It's just nice. It's more so for the lessons, and it was a nice read, so I'm not actually mad at it. So in the book, she goes through like hundreds of different possibilities, but I'll go through the 5 or 6, maybe 7 different universes in more detail, and I'll also share what she learned in that. It's not in any particular order either. I did not take the best notes during this because it was a lighter book and I wanted to enjoy it and I wanted to talk about the feelings more so rather than like the nitty gritty details. You know, if this was a nonfiction self-help, I would definitely be pulling those stats. I would definitely be pulling more information, but I think that this is a lot more lighthearted. So I wanted to have a little bit more fun with it and also be able to talk to you the way that I'm talking to you right now, where I'm not reading off of a script, where I'm talking like to you directly more so. Unscripted, maybe is the better way. Anyways, we'll start with the man that she left, not at the altar, but 2 days before the wedding. So she goes into the alternate universe where she stays and she marries that man. Well, he wanted to open a pub. And so in this alternate universe, they're pub owners. They live above the pub and they also have financial issues because it's hard to have a business, obviously. He also cheated on her and she realizes, which I had a hint. I kind of knew that this was going to happen, but when she's in this alternate universe, she's reminded of all the things that she had forgotten since they broke up, that like she was minimizing herself for him. For example, she's really nerdy. She's a very smart person. And so in the pub, they had trivia night and she knew a fact. And when he talked to her about it, she pretended like she didn't know because she knew that if she would have said like, oh yeah, I do know this nerdy fact, that he was going to make fun of her. And so he's cheating on her. There's financial issues. He's drinking a lot. I think he's an alcoholic. And he also makes hide parts of herself. And so while she's living that alternate universe, she remembers, you know, it's almost like when you break up with someone, right? Like you forget all the bad stuff. And that is definitely what she was doing. So in this alternate universe, she's able to stick up for herself. She's able to say basically like, you are not good for me. I'm not happy with you. Like, I don't feel good around you. So like, you ain't shit. And so she leaves him in that alternate universe. But her alternate universe person does whatever she's going to do because like different people essentially. And so she comes back to the library and she chooses a different route to go down. So she goes to staying in the band with her brother, and they sign the record deal and they get rich and famous. She's touring all over the world, winning awards, all of these things, right? She suffers a lot because people take advantage of her financially. I think she has lawsuits going on. She was sexually assaulted. She was an alcoholic, so she struggled a lot. And her brother actually OD'd in this version because they were rock stars. So with that, she's learning that there are pros and cons to everything that you do. In her root life, she didn't become rich and famous, and her brother is mad at her for not doing that. Whereas if she did become rich and famous, he would have died. She doesn't want to live in a world without her brother. So she goes back to the library and she goes to the universe where she pursues swimming. And she's an Olympic swimmer and she wins all the gold medals. She's doing all these like TED Talks and speaking at all these engagements, very fancy hotel rooms. And in this reality, because she's one of the fittest people on earth, right, being an Olympian, her dad also gets healthy. And so he doesn't die from being unhealthy in this universe. He lives a long life. Well, turns out he cheats on Nora's mom with another swimming Olympian's mom. So it's like, if she would have stayed with swimming, she would have been successful in swimming, but then her dad would have cheated and her mom would have been, devastated, obviously. And I think her mom actually died earlier in this version of the world of cancer. And she was also alone because Nora was being an Olympian, like training and doing all the things. So she got sick and she passed away within a short period of time. Whereas Nora was like, let's say in like Japan or something, competing and training. And so there's that con too. There's pros and cons no matter what. And she goes back to the library and she pursues a career that her childhood librarian suggested to her because she was such a smart, bright girl. She suggested that she become like a glaciologist, like someone who studies glaciers. And so when she goes to that alternate universe, she realizes like, I didn't really want to do that. This is not actually a regret that I have. This is just something that the librarian said. And because I like the librarian and I wanted to make her happy, I felt like a failure because I didn't do what she thought I should do. Like it was a realization that like, wait, I've been like prioritizing other people's desires or goals for me. And I don't even know what my own goals are. Like she genuinely doesn't know, because if you notice every single thing, the swimming was her dad, band was for her brother, being married to the man was because he wanted to marry her. And now the glaciologist thing was also not for her. It was for the librarian. So she had that lesson learned of like, wait, I'm not even paying attention to what I want, which you guys already know how I feel about us women doing that. It's very common and we have to stop. Easier said than done. So after that, she goes back to the library and she's like, you know what? Let me go to the cat. Let me be a better cat parent and let me close all the doors and make sure the cat doesn't escape, right? So in this reality, the cat does not escape, but it does pass away on its own in that same night because it had a heart condition. And that's why in her root life, in the real life, that's why the cat was dead in the street. It had like, let's say an aneurysm or like a cardiovascular thing, like something was wrong with it. And so it died in the street. It actually did not get hit by a car. Like the cat did not die in her real life because she was a bad cat parent. It was because the cat knew something was wrong and he left the house. He like escaped so that he wouldn't die in her presence and wouldn't hurt her. That's also a reminder that just because you think this is why something happened doesn't mean that it is. Another example is in a lot of realities that she lives throughout the book, she goes back to the music store that she got fired from. And in so many, I think like 3 or 4 versions, the music store closed because of financial issues. She starts to realize that in her root life, in her real life, she didn't get fired because she had a bad attitude. She got fired because that man was having money. And instead of telling her like, hey, we don't have money to pay you, he's like, oh, it was like, we don't have money because you have a bad attitude and you're drawing away. You're keeping the people away. You're not selling. And like, that's not true. It's like, just because people tell you certain things or certain things happen, it does not mean that that's true. And so I think that is kind of the purpose of this, is like, it's about the perspective and it's about how you decide to interpret the world. And so specifically when she's getting fired from the job, like whatever your employer says to you, I don't believe them. Even if they tell me, Vanessa, it's because of you, I don't believe you. I really don't believe you. It's because of your processes. It's because of the boss. It's because of who's the boss's boss and what they said. Like, I don't, like, you take it the way that you decide to take it. It's not what they say. It's like how you decide to take it. She goes back to the library, obviously, and she decides to go live with her friend in Australia. And so turns out, had she gone and lived with her friend in Australia in this one universe that she explores, her friend would have died on the way to Nora's birthday party. You have this image of how the thing would have gone. She has this image of how the wedding would have gone, how the swimming would have gone. But turns out it could go that way, and also all these other things could happen too. And so we like to romanticize the things that we don't do and be ashamed of the things, but the reality is nothing's perfect. Because her friend died, she's living with this roommate that doesn't seem like they jive, like they don't mesh well. She also has a boyfriend who seems pretty bland and boring. So she just seems like she's kind of existing. Back to the library we go. One of the last ones that we really get into is when she goes to be with the surgeon, where she says yes to the guy for the coffee date, and she goes to be with the surgeon. And this life is like a white picket fence life. He has a lot of money, and he's also very present at home. He does the morning stuff with the daughter, and he, works late because he's a surgeon, but he makes up for it in a lot of different ways, making breakfast, letting her sleep in, like just very present when he is able to. And she also has her own career as well, where she teaches philosophy. She's like an expert in the field, so she's very bright, and she's able to do that, which is what she does in her root life. She majored in philosophy. She just didn't pursue a career in it. And so in this world with the surgeon, she does pursue that career in it. And she also has a baby. The baby's like 3 or 4. That's beautiful because in her root life, she doesn't have any kids. She's not married. And so it's a white picket fence. It seems like she has everything that she could possibly want. So she lives in that universe for a few weeks. And she starts to get this feeling of like, this isn't really my life. She didn't do the things that needed to be done to get to that point, but she's enjoying the fruits of that labor that she didn't do. It doesn't sit right with her. Involuntarily, because of these inner feelings that are festering, she gets sent back to the library because it's not really up to you. It's more like you get sent back to the library, not when you decide, but when you start to feel bad. So the library kind of pulled her back. She's obviously frustrated at that because it was a perfect life, but it gives her a sense of you have to do with your own life what you would want to do. She learns a lot through this whole process, and we as readers get secondhand learning. You learn that you can be anything that you want to be because in one life, you are doing that thing that you want to be. You're capable of a lot more than you know. We spend so much time wishing our lives were different, comparing ourselves to other people and to other versions of ourselves, when really most lives contain certain degrees of good and degrees of bad. There's no way of living that can stop you from experiencing sadness or hurting other people. Sadness is intrinsically part of the fabric of happiness. You can't have one without the other. Of course, they come in different degrees and quantities, but there is no life where you can be in a state of sheer happiness forever. And imagining there is just breeds more unhappiness in the life you're in. Nora had not tried to end her life because she was miserable. She tried to end her life because she convinced herself that there was no way out of her misery. She thought that her root life, that was it. And that's just not the case. I firmly believe in this. I really like that this is like the moral of the story, because a lot of people tell me that they feel like I have a really strong understanding of what I want to do. And that is not the case. I just roll with the punches. That's really it. Like, if I want to do something, I do it. If I don't want to do something, I don't do it. And so I think I just listen to myself. I think that, I guess a lot of people don't know what they want. They're not able to explore that. I am able to explore that. I've talked about it all the time. I don't know how often I can talk about it without sounding like I'm bragging, but I'm not bragging. Like, I feel like it is my duty as a privileged person, as the child of an immigrant, that like I have the opportunity to be happy, and I need to pursue that. For example, my cousin Tati, she's a hairstylist, she's a hairdresser, a cosmetologist. I really don't know the correct way to call someone who does hair. But that is so commendable. Like, she's been doing that since she was like 13 years old. I remember she was in 8th grade, so I was in 4th grade. All of the high school boys would come to her house on like Fridays and Saturdays before going out, and she would braid their hair. She was doing cornrows from like a small child. And now she's in New York doing Fashion Week. I feel like it's a very similar thing where it's like she's doing what she wants and she's doing what makes her happy, right? And teaching was that for me. Like, I loved my students. I loved positively impacting them. I loved being a safe space for them because I know like to not have a safe space. The second that I realized that it wasn't good for me anymore, I switched it. And I worked a really dumb job, a desk job, and I lived my life, my personal life, for like the first time ever. I did what I wanted. I lived in Jersey City. I hung out with friends. I started working out and cooking more. And like, I just started to really come into myself a little bit and listen to myself and what I needed. I have the opportunity to do this podcast. I have the financial freedom to do that. I have the safety nets to be able to do that. And I do feel like it's my duty because so many people don't have that freedom. It's connected to this book because I am deciding the life and the path that I want. And I feel like a lot of people do what Nora does throughout the book. You know, she feels like her cat died because of her. Her brother hates her because she didn't do this. Her dad and her job and her, like, it's not. Like, first of all, like, that's such a selfish and like egotistical view of the world. It's really hard to verbalize it and describe it because I do think that we need to prioritize ourselves without us being the center of the world for everyone. Like, you should be the center of your world for yourself. But in the grand scheme of things, no one gives a fuck about you. Like, if you get fired, it's probably not because of you. Even if they I'm telling you, even if they tell you it's because of you, I bet you it's not. I bet money it's not. Unless you're doing some crazy shit at work. I really don't care. Like, it's not. If you get broken up with, it's really probably not because of you. It's because the other person needed to process things, had a realization, was keeping things to themselves. They're going through their own thing. This book teaches you a lot of lessons of knowing that no matter what you do, something's going to suck. And I feel like people get really hung up on deciding what to do because they're scared of all the bad things that are going to happen. Like, bitch, if you stay doing what the fuck you're doing now, there's going to be bad shit happening. Like, literally. If, for example, if I stay podcasting forever, I'm going to like go bankrupt. Like, if I do this and I don't make money for like the next 5-10 years, I'm going to go bankrupt. There's like, I'm not making income. So it's like, if I stay and do this, there is going to be a bad outcome. If I get a job, a desk job that I hate, that I get paid less than $100,000, which is what I was, it's getting paid less than $70K at the other job. So it's like, if I would have stayed there, there would have been bad shit there too. I would have had income, but I would have had to drive 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, 3 days a week. And probably, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this year they're like, oh yeah, 5 days a week. There are cons to every single thing. You just have to decide which cons you're okay with. And I think that people get really hung up on like the perfect one, the right decision. There's no right decision. Nothing is right. It's what you want. Like, getting divorced is not right, right? But if that's what you want, bitch, go do that. If getting married is what you want, bitch, go do that. Like, whatever it is that you want, you have to go do it. Because no matter what you pick, just like this book, there's always cons. And that's life. Like, it's not just this, obviously. Like, that's real life. The book does a really good job of showing what living with depression looks like. For example, her centering, her blaming herself, the shame, the regret, everything is her fault. She sucks. She's not worthy of anything. In the book, the author says, some strange predictive homesickness that festered alongside a depression that told her ultimately she didn't deserve to be happy. So because she had that view of like, oh, I suck, then anything that happens, she's going to internalize it. And so even her cat dying, she said it was her fault, which I guess I can understand. Like, your cat escapes, it gets hit by a car. I hear what you're saying. But there needs to come a sense of, don't be your worst enemy. You have to learn and keep going and not give up. And they even say that in the book, that she convinced herself that there was no way out of her misery. And that's not the case. I mean, it's obviously easier said than done, but anyway, so the only thing that I don't like in the book was, again, how the alternate universes, I thought they were continuing on, and then the root life is also continuing on, so I thought you died, bitch, like, what do you mean? And then she was able to go back to her real life. The one thing that I didn't really like about the book is that we didn't get a happy ending. I would have loved to have the last chapter or maybe the epilogue be Nora's life was 5 years down the line, because it would have been something completely different than any of the realities that we explored in the book already. I thought that would have been a really nice thing where she doesn't end up with a surgeon. Her and her friend in Australia are still friendly. Her brother, we could have seen the progression of her life, but we didn't see that. And that was disappointing. I would have liked to get a happy ending. And I guess the happy ending was that she healed and she learned all those lessons from those alternate universes. And she was able to get a second chance and go back to her root life and continue on and decide how her life is. So that is the happy ending, but I want to see it. I want to scratch that itch. So that brings us to the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. New episodes are uploaded on Friday mornings. You can also follow me on social media and YouTube at Chicklit Podcast. And remember, if you have any book recommendations or if you want to be on an episode, send them my way. Thank you for listening. Bye.